chapter 22 is done rendering, but I'm not gonna upload it yet. Not quite yet. Because I'll upload it at the same time as I am to upload Steven Universe, so after this chapter. Let me just drop something back down. Damn it. Oh! There, I put that back there. God, it's fun. I can't even open a window. Out of the door that has a screen. That's as far as I know. The air quality is still in effect there. The air quality is still in effect. So, yeah. This is quite the long chapter. This was the last chapter of the book. But I am to read the epilogue to you as well. I need to make the epilogue cover photo still, so yeah, that's gonna take half an hour of my time. This one's already made, so yeah. Anyway, this is chapter 23, and it's called Valentine. And this chapter is Valentine is Clary's father, so this puts a little damper on their little romance, or their little love circle, triangle, whatever, because it's actually a triangle. It's a triangle because Alec thinks more like a square though. Because with Alec, Jace, Simon, and Clary, just those four. So Simon loves Clary, Clary loves Jace, and Alec thinks he loves Jace. And then no one loves Simon. Simon's all alone. As far as you guys know. Well, anyways, let's get on with this. Chapter 23, Valentine. And as soon as I sip of my water. Refreshing. But I'm starting to lose my voice. That's always great. Anyway, this might be 2 hours of recording, but I don't care. Anyway, let's go. Chapter 23, Valentine. I see I've interrupted something, said Valentine, his voice as dry as a desert afternoon. Son, would you care to tell me who this is? One of the Lightwood children, perhaps? Now, Valentine, I know you've already pieced it together. She looks like Jocelyn, and you know it. No, said Jace, he sounded tired and unhappy, but the hand on her wrist didn't loosen. This is Clary, Clarissa Frey. She's a friend of mine. She had Valentine's black eyes very ghostly, and probably several heads. And the toes of her still scissors. We fastened on the dagger, still taking her hand. I never thought I did. amusement, part irritation. "Where did you come by that blade, young lady?" Clary answered coldly. "Jace gave it to me." "Of course he did," said Valentine. His tone was mild. "May I see it?" "No!" Clary took a step back as if she thought he might lunge at her and fight, and felt the blade plucked neatly out of her fingers. Jace, holding the dagger, looked at her with an apologetic expression. "Jace!" she hissed, putting every ounce of the betrayal she felt into the single syllable of his name. All I said was, "You still don't understand, Clary," with a sort of deferential care that made her feel sick to her stomach. He went to Valentine and handed him the dagger. "Father?" "Yeah, God." Valentine took the dagger in his big, long-boned hand and examined it. "This is a kinjal. Sorry if I mispronounce this. A Circassian dagger. This particular one used to be one of a matched pair. Here, see the star of the Morgenstans carved into the blade?" He turned it over, showing it to Jace. "I'm surprised the Lightwoods never noticed." "I never showed it to them," said Jace. "They let me have my own private things. They didn't pry." "Of course they didn't," said Valentine. He handed the kinjal back to Jace. "They thought you were Michael Whalen's son." Jace, sliding the red-hilted dagger into his belt, looked up. "So did I," he said softly, and in that moment, Clary saw that this was no joke, that Jace was not just playing along for his own purposes. He really thought Valentine was his father, returned to him. Her cold despair was spreading through Clary's veins. Jace angry, Jace hostile, furious she could have dealt with. But this new Jace, fragile and shining in the light of his own personal miracle, was a stranger to her. Valentine looked at her over Jace's tawny head. His eyes were cool with amusement. "Perhaps," he said, "it would be a good idea for you to sit down now, Clary." She crossed her arms stubbornly over her chest. "No." "As you like." Valentine pulled out a chair and seated himself at the head of the table. After a moment, Jace sat down as well, beside a half-filled bottle of water. The journaling began to fade the night like his sons, like all the Nephilim. "A life of scars and killing," Hodgett said. "Clary," he said again, as if tasting the sound of her name. "Short for Clarissa? Not a name I would have chosen." "Yeah, well, Clary was never supposed to meet you, and you were never supposed to meet her." There was a grim curl to his lips. "He knows I'm his daughter," Clary thought. Somehow he knows, but he isn't saying it. Why isn't he saying it? For Jace's benefit, most likely. But of course he knows. You look like Jocelyn, and he knows that. Because of Jace, she realized. Jace would think. She couldn't imagine what he would think. Valentine had seen them embracing when he walked in the door. He must know. Someone devastated. Someone behind those fabulous black eyes. She cast another beseeching glance at Jace, but he was staring down at the wine glass by his left hand, half full of purplish red liquid. She could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. He was more upset than he was letting on. Wow. Little things that Clary will notice. I don't really care what you would have chosen, Clary said. I am sure, replied Valentine, leaning forward, that you don't. You're not Jace's father. Jace's father is nothing as does the plague. Even the silent brothers do not know who he really is, although soon enough they will. A small shiver passed over Clary. You mean Satan, or any great power lost, said Valentine, out of a refusal to serve, as mine was. I would not serve a corrupt government, and for that I lost my family, my lands, almost my life. The uprising was your fault, snapped Clary. People died in it, shadow hunters like you. Clary, Jace leaned forward, nearly knocking over the glass at his elbow. Just listen to him, will you? It's not like you thought. Hodge lied to us. I know, said Clary. You betrayed us to Valentine. He was Valentine's pawn. No, said Jace. No, Hodge was the one who wanted the mortal cup all along. He was the one who sent the raveners after your mother. My father, Valentine, only found out about it afterward and came to stop him. He brought your mother here to heal her, not to hurt her. Yes. Why? And you believe that crap? Clary said in disgust. It isn't true. Hodge was working for Valentine. They were in it together, getting the cup. He set us up, it's true, but he's just a tool. But he was the only one who knew where the house was. I know that isn't true, said Clary hotly. I mean, I was there, she turned on Valentine. I was in the room when you came to get the cup. You couldn't see me, but I was there. I saw you. You took the cup and you lifted the curse off Hodge. He couldn't have done it by himself. He said so. I did lift his curse, said Valentine measuredly, but I was moved by pity. He seemed so pathetic. You didn't feel pity. You didn't feel anything. That's enough, Clary. It was Jay. She stared at him. His cheeks were flushed as if he'd been drinking the wine at his elbow. His eyes too bright. Don't talk to my father like that. He's not your father. That's actually Claire saying that. But I'd be saying that too. I was saying this when I first read the book. I was saying it constantly. He's not your father. He's not your father. Judith looked as if she had stopped him. Why are you so determined not to believe us? Because she loves you, said Valentine. Not a seat. Clary felt the blood drain out of her face. She looked at him, not knowing what he might say next, but dreading it. She felt as if she were edging toward a precipice, some terrible hurtling fall into nothing and nowhere. Vertigo gripped her stomach. These lips serious? Valentine was looking at Clary with he could tell. And if he could tell he had her pinned like a butterfly to a board. He fears I am taking advantage of you, that I have brainwashed you. It isn't so, of course. If you looked into your own mother's soul, you would know it. Clary just stared at his eyes on him, strangely wondered. Sit down, said Valentine. Let her come through on her own. Let her come through on her own. Valentine cut in. His voice was soothing. Jace, I thought to spare you. I thought a story of a mother who died would hurt you less than the story of a mother who abandoned you before your first birthday. She didn't abandon. Without you, her son was dead. Jace's slim fingers tightened convulsively around the glass's stem. Clary thought for a moment that it might shatter. My mother is alive? She is, said Valentine. Alive and asleep in one of the downstairs rooms at this very moment, yes, he said, cutting off Jace before he could speak. Jocelyn is your mother. Jocelyn is your mother, Jonathan. And Clary? Clary is your sister. Oh, God. And the fact that I know exactly stuff that I know exactly how the series ends is painful with the second book and the third book. Jace jerked his hand back, the wine glass tips spilling frothy scarlet liquid across the white tablecloth. Jonathan, Jace is on an awful color, a sort of greenish white. That's not true, he said. There's been a mistake. It couldn't possibly be true. Valentine looked steadily at his son. A cause for rejoicing, he said in a low, contemplative voice. I would have thought. Yesterday you were an orphan, Jonathan. And now a father, a mother, a sister you never knew you had. It isn't possible, said Jace again. Clary isn't my sister. If she were, then what? Valentine said. Jace did not reply, but his sick look of nauseous horror was enough for Clary. Stumbling a little, she came nearer the table and knelt beside his chair, reaching for his hand. Jace, he jerked away from her, his fingers nodding. Don't! Hatred for Valentine burned unshed tears. He had held back, and by not saying what he knew, that she was his daughter, made her complicit in his silence. And now, having dropped the truth on them with the weight of a crushing boulder, he sat back to watch the results with a cool consideration. How could Jace not see how faithful he was? Tell me it's not true, Jace said, staring at the tablecloth. Clary swallowed against the burning in her throat. I can't do that. Valentine sounded as if he were smiling. So you admit it now that I've been telling the truth all this time? No, she shot back without looking at him. You're telling lies with a little bit of the truth mixed in. Yeah, I guess so. This grows tiresome, said Valentine. If you want to hear the truth, Clarissa, this is the truth. You have heard stories of the uprising. Is that correct? You are. You are. Clary said nothing. She during the uprising. I assumed Michael's name and placed when I fled the glass city with my son. It was easy enough, really and his closest friends selected to an exile, being himself a and I bided my time. He fingered the filigreed edge of a glass thoughtfully. He was left-handed, Clary saw, but Jace. And if I was not prepared to take certain steps, he would reveal it. I did not know who the letter was from, but it did not matter. I was not prepared to. Besides, I knew my safety was compromised and would be unless he thought me dead. Beyond his reach, I staged my death a second time. With the help of Blackwell and Hangboard, and for Jace's own safety, made sure that my son would be sent here to the protection of the lifeless. So you let Jace think you were dead? Against his own fingers, both not down and looked at his son with a smile, just John could happen since I was dead, yes. He had to think he was like the way his son, and I it was Michael there on the He has a family. He has a father. Jace made a noise in his throat and moved his hands away from his face. My mother fled after the uprising, said Valentine. I was a disgraced man. The clave would have hunted me down had they thought I lived. She could not bear her association with me and ran. The pain in his voice was palpable and faked. Clary thought bitterly. The manipulated creep. Yes. Manipulated creep. I did not know she was pregnant at the time of his Clary. He smiled a little from his fingers slowly down the wine glass. But blood calls to blood, as they say, he went on. Fate has borne us to this convergence. Our families together again. We can use the portal, he said to Jace. Go to Iris, back to the manor house. Jace shivered a little, but nodded, still staring numbly at his hands. We'll be together there, said Valentine, as we should be. That sounds terrific, Clary thought. Just you, your comatose wife, your shell-shocked son, and your daughter who hates your guts. Not to mention that your two kids make you in love with each other. Yeah, that sounds like a perfect family reunion. Yep. Totally. Totally a perfect family reunion there. Aloud, she said, "Oh, I am not doing any legacy. Neither is my mother." Right there, said Jason. The only place for us to go is up there. You can't be serious. An enormous crash hit. So loud that it sounded like it. Sounds as if a long, possibly Jace was catching his nauseous horror responded automatically, half-frozen. They're on their way, Valentine rose to his feet. Clary heard footsteps. A moment later, no. A moment later, the door of the room was blown open. Mike stood on the threshold and rushed into the room first. Clary bit back a cry. He was covered in blood. His jeans and shirt drenched in water. The lower half of his face barely dripped. His hands were red to the wrists. The blood that coated them still wet and running. She had no idea if any of the blood was his. She heard herself cry out his name, and then she was running across the room to him and nearly tripping over herself in her eagerness to grab at his shirt front and hang on, the way she hadn't done since she was 8 years old. For a moment his big hand came up and cupped the back of her head, holding her against him in a one-armed bear hug. Then he pushed her away gently. "I'm all over blood," he said. "Don't worry, it isn't mine." "No, it's Blackwell's and Pangborn." "Then whose is it?" It's just Pangborn's. Wait, I just figured. Then whose is it? It was Valentine's voice in Clary's tone, whose arm protectively across his shoulders. Valentine was watching the dog, his eyes narrow, calculating. Jace had risen to his feet and come around the table and was standing hesitantly behind his father. Pangborn, said Luke. So it's just Pangborns, none of Blackwell's. You'd think there were some of Blackwell's, depending on if they rolled around in Blackwell's blood while they were fighting, so. Valentine passed a hand over his face as if the news pained him. "I see. Did you tear out his throat with your teeth?" "Actually," said Luke, "I killed him with this." With his free hand, he held out the long, thin dagger he had killed the Forsaken with. In the light, she could see the blue stones in the hilt. "Do you remember it?" Valentine looked at it, and Clary saw his jaw tighten. "I do," he said, and Clary wondered if he, too, were remembering their earlier conversation. "This is a Kinjal. A Circassian dagger. This particular one used to be one of a matched pair. You handed it to me 17 years ago and told me to end my life with it. said Luke, the weapon gripped tightly in his hand. The blade of it was longer than the blade of the red-hilted kinjal in Jace's belt. It was somewhere between a dagger and a sword, and its blade was needle-tipped. The memory of old grief. Well, at least we know Valentine grieves. We don't really get to see much of Valentine. Ever. Okay, so where was I? I tried to save you from yourself, Lucian. I made a grave mistake. If only I'd had the strength to kill you myself. You would have died a man. You could have died a man, damn it. Like you? Asked Luke, and in that moment, Clary saw something in him. Of the Luke she'd always known, who could tell when she was lying or pretending, who called her on it when she was being arrogant or untruthful. In the bitterness of his voice, she heard the love he'd once had for Valentine, curdled into a wary hatred. A man who chains his unconscious wife to a bed in the hopes of torturing her for information when she wakes up? That's your bravery? Jace was staring at his father. Clary saw the seizure of anger that runs up and twisted Valentine's features. Then it was gone and his face was smooth. I didn't torture her, he said. She is chained for her own protection. Against what? Luke demanded, stepping farther into the room. The only thing endangering her is you. The only thing that ever endangered her was you. She spent her life running to get away from you. I loved her, said Valentine. I never would have hurt her. It was you. It was you who turned her against me. Keep believing that, Valentine. Just keep believing that. Luke laughed. She didn't need me to turn her against you. She learned to hate you on her own. That is a lie! Valentine roared with sudden savagery and drew his sword from the sheath at his waist. The blade was flat and matte black, patterned with a design of silver stars. He leveled the blade at Luke's heart. Jace took a step toward Valentine. Father, Jonathan, be silent, shouted Valentine, but it was too late. Clary saw the shock on Luke's face as he stared at Jace. Jonathan, he whispered. Jace's mouth twisted. Don't you call me that, he said fiercely, his gold eyes blazing. I'll kill you myself if you call me that. Pointed at his heart and took his eyes off Jace. Your mother would be proud, he said so quietly that even Clary, standing beside him, had to strain to hear it. Oh, he's like, what? I don't have a mother, said Jace. His hands were shaking. The woman who gave birth to me walked away from me before I learned to remember her face. I was nothing to her. I was nothing to her, so she was nothing to me. Your mother is not the one who walked away from you, said Luke, moving slowly to Valentine. I would have thought even you I suppose I was wrong. That was not Valentine's tone was almost languid, but there was hungry, sudden violence. I know of my daughter, or I'll kill you where you stand. I'm not your daughter, said Clary fiercely, but Luke pushed her away from him, so hard that she nearly fell. Get out of here, he said. Get to where it's safe. I'm not leaving you. Clary, I mean it. Get out of here. Luke was already lifting his dagger. This is not your fight. Clary stumbled away from him toward the door that led to the landing. Maybe she could run for help, for Ella. Ella! Then Jace was in front of the bubbling window to the door. She had forgotten how fast she moved, soft as a cat, quick as light. They've broken down the front door. This place will be full of Forsaken. She shoved at him. Let me out! Jace held her back with a grip like iron. So they can tear you apart? Not a chance. Yeah, he's still here. A loud flash of metal sounded behind her. Clary pulled away from Jason's side, but Valentine had struck at her neck, who had met his blow, his hair shuffling Clary. Their blades ground apart, and now they were moving across the floor in a flurry of feints and slashes. Oh my God, she whispered, they're going to kill each other. Jason's eyes were nearly dark. You don't understand. This is how it's done. Past Valentine's bed, catching him like blow across his shoulder. Blood flowed freely, staining the cloth of his white shirt. Valentine threw back his head and laughed. Are sure it is, he said. I thought you had it in you, Lucian. Luke stood very straight, the knife blocking his face from Clary's view. You taught me that move yourself, but that was the music of You tore my heart out years ago, he said, and even Clary could not tell if the sorrow in his voice was real or feigned. When you betrayed and deserted me, Luke struck at him again, but Valentine was moving swiftly back across the floor. For a big man, he moved surprisingly lightly. It was you who turned my wife against her own kind. You came to her when she was weakest. With your piteousness, your helpless need. I was distant and she thought you loved her. She was a fool. Jace was taut as a wire beside Clary. She could feel his tension, like the sparks given off by a gun on a electrical cable. That's your mother Valentine's talking about, she said. She abandoned me, said Jace. Some mother. She thought you were dead. You want to know how I know that? Because she kept a box in her bedroom. It had your initials on it. JC. So she had a box, said Jace. Lots of people have boxes. They keep things in them. It's a growing trend, I hear. Oh, Jace. Even in times like this, you know how to, joke. Be sarcastic. It had a lock of your hair in it, baby hair, and a photograph, maybe too. She used to take it out every year and cry over it. Awful broken-hearted crying. Jason's hand clenched at his side. Stop it, he said between his teeth. Stop what? Telling you the truth? She thought you had died. She'd never have left you. She'd known you were alive. You thought your father was dead. I saw him die, or I thought I did. I didn't just hear about it. Along with the bones of her mother and father. At last, Jace looked at her. She saw the disbelief plain in his eyes, and around his eyes the strain of maintaining that disbelief. She could see, almost as if she saw through a glamour, the fragile construct of his faith in his father, that he wore like a transparent armor protecting him from the truth. Somewhere, she thought, there was a chink in that armor. Somewhere, if she could find the right words, it could be breached. That's ridiculous, he said. I didn't lie. I didn't die. eyes flew open as if in astonishment rather than pain. Valentine jerked his hands with a sharp laugh. Valentine struck again, this time knocking the weapon from Luke's hand. It hit the floor with a hollow clang, and Valentine kicked it hard, sending it skittering on his shoulders. Valentine raised the black sword over Luke's body, flowing along the blue arms and clay thought frozen in a moment of horror. How could anything so good with his sweet teeth? The frozen moment passed. Clary twisted away from Jace, ducking his reaching hand. Clary threw herself on just as Valentine's sword drove downward. She saw Valentine's eyes to the sword. It seemed like neons. Yes, neons. Valentine cried out, and she looked up to see him holding his empty sword hand, which was bleeding. The red-hilted kinjal lay several feet away on the stone floor, next to the black sword. Turning in astonishment, she saw Jace by the door, his arms still raised, and realized he must have flung the dagger with enough force to knock the black sword out of his father's hand. Very pale, he slowly lowered his arm, his eyes on Valentine, wide and pleading. Father, Valentine looked at his bleeding hand, and for a moment, Clary saw a spasm of rage cross his face, like a light flickering out. His voice when he spoke was mild. That was an excellent throw, Jace. Jace hesitated. But your hand, I just thought... I would not have hurt your sister, said Valentine, moving swiftly to retrieve both his sword and the red-hilted kinjal, which he stuck through his belt. I would have stopped the blow, but your family concern is commendable. Liar! Such a liar! Clary! The sharp, nauseous pain. Luke was lying on his back, eyes half closed, his breathing ragged. Blood bubbled up from the hole in his torn shirt. I need a bandage, she said in a choked voice. What? Anything will do. Jace froze where he was, hand already reaching for his pocket. Clary sat, her father said in a voice as oily as steel, slick with butter. Okay. This man is an enemy of our family, an enemy of the clave. We are hunters, and that means sometimes we are killers. Surely you understand that. Demon hunters, said Clary. Demon killers, not murderers. There's a difference. He's a demon, Clarissa said Valentine, still in the same soft voice. A demon with a man's face. I know how deceptive such monsters can be. Remember, I spared him once myself. He's not a demon. Because people can only become demons a certain way. And I'm not going to spoil you guys on that, because you will find that out on your own in book 2? Yeah, book 2 of Infernal Devices. So once we get through to the 4th book, you will find out after the 4th book of this series. Anyways, let's continue. Monster, echoed Clary. She thought of Luke. Luke pushing her on the swings when she was 5 years old. Higher, always higher. Luke at her graduation from middle school. Camera clicking away like a proud father's. Luke sorting through each box of books as at the Broadway store, looking for anything she might like and putting it aside. Luke lifting her up to pull apples down from the trees near his farmhouse. Luke, whose place is her father, this man was trying to take. Luke isn't a monster, she said in a voice that matched Valentine's steel to steel. Or a murderer, you are. Clary, it was Jace. Clary ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on her father's, cold black ones. You murdered your wife's parents, not in battle, but in cold blood, she said. And I bet you murdered Michael Wayland and his little boy too. Threw their bones in with my grandparents, so that my mother would think you and Jace were dead. Now, Luke didn't say that Valentine's bones were in the fire. Though Michael Wayland's the bones of two older men in fire, but it's quite actually possible. It is quite possible, actually. Worse for yourself. It's better if you don't look. Like you do, she hissed back, shutting your eyes and pretending something's not happening. Doesn't make it not true, Jace. You want to know better. Clary, stop. His tone almost brought her up short. He sounded desperate. Valentine was chuckling. If only I had thought, he said, to bring with me a blade of real silver. I could dispatch you in the true manner of your kind, Lucian. Luke snarled something Clary couldn't hear. She hoped it was rude. Yeah, I would too. I would hope it's rude. Myself, like, how much do we have left? Oh, it's quite a bit. Quite a bit. Okay. She tried to twist away from Jace, her feet slipped and he caught her, yanking her back with agonizing force. He had his arms around her, she thought, but not the way she had once hoped, not as she had ever imagined. At least let me get up, said Luke. Let me die on my feet. Valentine looked at him along the length of the blade and shrugged. You can die on your back or on your knees, he said. But only a man deserves to die slowly, and you're not a man. No, Clary shows, as not looking at her, Luke began to throw himself into a kneeling position. Why do you have to make it worse for yourself, Jace demanded in a low, tense whisper. I told you not to worry. She was panting with exertion and pain. Why do you have to lie to yourself? I'm not lying. His grip on her tightened savagely, though she hadn't tried to pull away. I just want what's good in my life. My father, my family. I can't lose it all again. Ugh. God damn it, Jace. The pain in there. I feel it. Ugh. God. Jace stood facing his father over the quivering hilt of his sword, his face white with his gaze steady, but his gaze steady. I think we should leave. Valentine stood and almost disinterestedly caressed the hilt of the sword that had driven into the floor. I think you heard me, Father. Valentine's voice was like a whip. Jonathan Morgenstern. No, quick, lightning. Jason leaned the hilt of the sword, tore it free from the floorboard, and raised it. The element lightning fell flat, the point hovering up to the edge of the light's body. That's not my name, he said. My name is Jason. Valentine's eyes were and Jason said his son to know you have no Wayland blood. Michael Wayland was a stranger to you. So, said Jace calmly, are you? He jerked his head to the left. Valentine shook his head. Never. I will not take orders from the child. the sword kissed Valentine's throat. Clary stared in fascinated horror. "I'm a very well-trained child," said Jace. "You instructed me yourself in the precise art of killing. I only need to move 2 fingers to cut your throat. Did you know that?" His eyes were steely. "I suppose you did." "You're skilled enough," said Valentine. His tone was dismissive, but Clary noticed he was standing very still indeed. But you could not kill me. You have always been soft-hearted." Perhaps he couldn't, and with Luke on his feet now, pale and bloody but upright. But I could, and I'm not entirely sure he could stop me. Valentine's feverish eyes flicked to Luke and back to his son. Jace hadn't turned when Luke spoke, but stood still as a statue, the sword unmoving in his hand. "You heard the monster threatening me, Valentine," said Valentine. "You side with it? Or it? Not a monster. He was your friend. Well, was your friend." "It has a point," said Jace mildly. "I'm not entirely sure I could stop him if he wanted to do you damage. Werewolves heal so fast." "Yeah." Valentine's lip was curled. "So," he snapped. "Like your mother, you would let this creature, this half-breed, continue with me. But you would not. You stabbed the sword in Jason's hand seemed to tremble. "You left me when I was a child," he said in a measured voice. "You let me think you were dead, and you sent me away to live with strangers. You never told me I had a mother, a sister. You left me alone." The word was a cry. "I did it for you, to keep you safe," Valentine protested. "If you cared about Jace, if you cared about blood, you wouldn't have killed his grandparents. You murdered innocent people," Clary cut in furious. "Innocent," snapped Valentine. "No one is innocent in a war. They sided with Jocelyn against me. They would have let her take my son away from me. Okay. They would have allowed her to take my son from me." Luke let out a hissing breath. "You knew she was going to leave you," he said. "You knew she was going to run, even before the uprising?" "Of course I knew," roared Valentine. "Well, of course. Not like Jocelyn could hide it very well. Because that's not something you hide very well. Well, anyone can really hide very well. Anyways. "Of course I knew," roared Valentine. His icy control had cracked and Clary could see the molten rage seething underneath, coiling the tendons in his neck. Clenching his hands into fists, "I did what I had to protect my own, and in the end I gave them more than they ever deserved. The funeral pyre awarded only to the greatest warriors in the world. You burned them," said Clary flatly. He had been running. Clary could see the sweat shimmering on the sharp divide of his collarbones, sticking his hair to his temples. The veins were visible along the backs of his hands. "He's going to kill him," she thought. "He's going to kill Valentine." Well, maybe. I'm not going to tell you guys. She stepped forward hastily. "Jace, we need the cup, or you know what he'll do with it." Jace licked his dry lips. "The cup, father." Clary with the sword. Let him have it, Jace. He shook his head. I can't do that. She took another step forward. One more and she'd be close enough to touch him. Yes, you can, she said gently. Please. He didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on his father's. The moment stretched out and out, interminable. At last he nodded, partly lowering his hand, but he did let Luke move to stand beside him and place his hand over Jason's on the hilt of the blade. You can let go now, Valentine. Luke said, and seeing Clary's face amended himself. Jace. Jace seemed not to have heard him. He released the hilt and moved away from his father. Some of Jace's color had come back, and he was now a shade more like putty, his lip bloody where he'd bitten it. Clary ached to touch him, but put her arms around him. Knew he'd never let her. This chapter. I have a suggestion, said Valentine to Luke in a surprisingly even tone. Let me guess, said Luke. It's don't kill me, isn't it? Maybe? Valentine laughed a sound without any humor in it. I would hardly lower myself to ask you for my life, he said. Good, said Luke, nudging the other man's chin with his blade. I'm not going to kill you unless you force my hand, Valentine. I draw the line at murdering you in front of your own children. What I want is the cup. Yeah, I would draw the line there too. And murdering oh my god. The roaring downstairs was louder now. Clary could hear what sounded like footsteps in the corridor outside. Luke, I hear it, he snapped. The cup's in Idris. I told you, said Valentine, his eyes shifting past Luke. Luke was sweating. If it's in Idris, you use the portal to bring it there. I will go with you. Bring it back. Luke's eyes were darting. There was more movement in the corridor outside. Outside now, sounds of shouting and something shattering. Clary, stay with your brother. After we go through, you use the portal to take yourself to a safe place. I won't leave you here, said Jace. Yes, you will, something thudded against the door. Luke raised his voice. Valentine, the portal! Move! Or what? Valentine's eyes were fixed on the door with a considering look. I'll kill you if you force my hand, Luke said, in front of them or not. The portal, Valentine. Now. Valentine spread his hands wide. If you wish. He stepped lightly backward, just as the door exploded inward, hinges scattering across the floor. Luke ducked out of the way to avoid being crushed by the falling door, turning as he did so, the sword still in his hand. A wolf stood in the doorway, a mountain of growling, brindled fur, shoulders hunched forward, lips curled back over snarling teeth. Blood ran from innumerable gashes in his pelt. Okay. Shouldn't that's okay. Jace was swearing softly, Serafe blade already in his hand. Clary caught at his wrist. Don't, he's a friend. Jace shot her an incredulous glance, but lowered his arm. Alaric, Luke shouted something then, in a language Clary didn't understand. Alaric snarled again, crouching closer to the floor, and for a confused moment she thought he was going to hurl himself at Luke. Then she saw Valentine's hand at his belt, the flash of red jewels, and realized that she had forgotten that he still had Jace's dagger. She heard a voice shout Luke's name. She thought it was her own, then realized that her throat seemed glued shut and that it was Jace's who had shouted. And that was Jace who had shouted. Damn it. Luke slewed around excruciatingly slowly, it seemed, as the knife left Valentine's hand and flew toward him like a silver butterfly, turning over and over in the air. Luke raised his blade and something huge and tawny gray hurled between him and Valentine. She heard Alaric's howl rising suddenly, cut off, heard the sound of the blade struck. She gasped and tried to run forward, but Jace pulled her back. The wolf crumbled at Luke's feet, blood spattering his fur feebly with his paws. Alaric clawed at the hilt of the knife protruding from his chest. Valentine laughed. And this is how you repay the unquestioning loyalty you bought so cheaply, Lucian, he said, by letting them die for you. He was backing up, his eyes still on Luke. Luke, white-faced, looking at him, and then down at Alaric, shook his head once and dropped to his knees, leaning over the fallen werewolf, damn it. Jay, still holding Clary by the shoulders, hissed, "Stay here, you hear me? Stay here," and set off after Valentine, who was hurrying inexplicably toward the far wall. Did he plan to throw himself out the window? Claire could see his reflection in the big gold frame mirror as he neared it, and the expression on his face, a sort of sneering relief, filled her with a murderous rage. "Like hell I will," she muttered. Yeah, Clary doesn't listen. "Like hell I will," she muttered, moving to follow Jace. She paused only to grab the blue-hilted kinjal from the floor, beneath the table where Valentine had kicked it. The weapon in her hand felt comfortable now, reassuring as she pushed a fallen chair out of her way and approached the mirror. Jace had the seraph blade out, its light casting a hard illumination upward, darkening the circles under his eyes, the hollows of his cheeks. Valentine had turned and stood outlined in its light, his back against the mirror. In its surface, Clary could also see Luke behind them. He had set his sword down and was pulling the red-hilted kinjal out of Alaric's chest, gently and carefully. She felt sick and gripped her own blade more tightly. "Jace," she began. He didn't turn to look at her, though of course he could see her in the mirror's reflection. "Claire, I told you to wait." "She's like your mother," said Valentine. One of his hands was behind him. He was running it along the edge of the mirror's heavy gilt frame. "Doesn't like to do what she's told." Jace wasn't shaking as he'd been earlier, but Clary could see how thin his control had been stretched, like the skin over a drum. "I'll go with him to Idris, Clary. I'll bring the cup back." "No, you can't," Clary began, and saw in the mirror how his face twisted. "Do you have a better idea?" he demanded. "But Lucian," said Valentine in a voice like silk, "is attending to a fallen comrade. As for the cup and Idris, they are not far, through the looking glass, one might say." Jace's eyes narrowed. The mirror was What the mirror? The mirror! The mirror is the portal? Valentine's lips thinned and he dropped his hand, moving back from the mirror, as the image in it swirled and changed like watercolors running in a painting. Instead of the room with its dark wooden candles, now Clary could see green fields, the thick emerald leaves of trees, and a wide meadow sweeping down to a large stone house in the distance. She could hear the buzzing sound of bees and the rustle of leaves and wind, and smell the honeysuckle carried on the wind. "I told you it was not far." Valentine stood in what was now a gilt-arched doorway, his hair stirring in the same wind that ruffled the leaves on the distant trees. Is it as you remember it, Jonathan? Has nothing changed?" Clary's heart clenched inside her chest. She had no doubt that this was Jace's childhood home, presented to tempt him as you might tempt a child with candy or a toy. "Yeah, maybe." She looked toward Jace, but he didn't seem to hear her at all. He was staring at the portal and the view beyond it of the green fields and the manor house. She saw his face soften. Oh God! The wistful curve of his mouth as if he were looking at someone he loved, looking at a place he loved. You can still come home, said his father. The light from the seraph blade that Jace held threw his shadow backwards, so it seemed to move across the portal, darkening the bright fields, the meadow beyond. The smile faded from Jace's mouth. That's not my home, he said. This is my home now. A spasm of fury twisted his features. Valentine looked at his son. She would never forget that look. It made her feel a sudden wild longing for her mother, because no matter how angry her mother had been with her, Jocelyn had never looked at her like that. She had always looked at her with love. If she could have felt more pity for Jace than she already did, she would have felt it then. Very well, said Valentine, and took a swift step back through the portal so that his feet struck the earth of Idris. His lips curved into a smile. Ah, he said, home. Jace stumbling to the edge of the portal before stopping, a hand against the gilt frame. A strange hesitation seemed to have taken hold of him, even as Idris shimmered before his eyes like a mirage in the desert. It would only take a step. Jace, don't, Clary said quickly. Don't go after him. But the cup, said Jace. She could not tell what he was thinking, but the blade in his hand was shaking violently as his hand shook. Let the glaive get it, Jace, please. If you go through that portal, you might never come back. Valentine will kill you. You don't want to believe it, but he will. Yeah, he will. Yeah. Your sister is right, Valentine. Valentine was standing amid green grass and wildflowers, the blades waving around his feet, and Clary realized that though he and they were inches away from each other, they stood in different countries. Do you really think you can win this? Though you have a seraph blade and I am unarmed, not only am I stronger than you, but I doubt you have it in you to kill me. And you will have to kill me, Jonathan, before I'll give the cup to you. Jace tightened his grip on the angel blade. I can. No, you can't. Valentine reached out through the portal and seized Jace's wrist in his hand, dragging it forward until the tip of the seraph blade touched his chest, where Jace's hand and wrist passed through the portal. They seemed to shimmer as if they had been cast in water. Do it then, said Valentine. Drive the blade in. 3 inches, maybe 4. He jerked the blade forward, the dagger's tip slicing the fabric of his shirt. A red circle like a poppy. Poppy, yeah, symbol of Remembrance Day here. Loomed just over his heart. Jace with a gasp yanked his arm free and staggered back. As I thought, said Valentine, too soft-hearted. And with a shocking suddenness, he swung his fist toward Jace. Clary cried out, but the blow never connected. Instead, it struck the surface of the portal. Between them with a sound like 1,000 fragile shattering things, spiderwebbing cracks fissured the glass that was not glass. The last thing Clary heard before the portal dissolved into a deluge of ragged shards was Valentine's derisive laughter. Glass surged across the floor like a shower of ice, a strangely beautiful cascade of silver shards. Clary stepped back, but Jace stood very still as the glass rained around him, staring at the empty frame of the mirror. Clary had expected him to swear, to shout, or curse at his father, but instead he only waited for the shards to stop falling, When they did, he knelt down silently and carefully into the welter of broken glass and picked up one of the larger pieces, turning it over in his hands. Don't, Clary knelt down next to him, setting down the knife she'd been holding. Its presence no longer comforted her. There wasn't anything you could have done. Yes, there was, he said, still looking down at the glass. Broken slivers of it powdered his hair. I could have. Okay, not I should have killed him. It's I could have killed him. He turned the shard toward her. Look, he said. She looked in the bit of glass she could still see a piece of iris, a bit of blue sky, the shadow of green leaves. She exhaled painfully. Jace, are you all right? Clary looked up. It was Luke, standing over them. He was weaponless, his eyes sunk into blue circles of exhaustion. We're fine, she said. She could see a crumpled figure on the ground behind him, half covered in Valentine's long coat. A hand protruded from beneath the fabric's edge. It was tipped with claws. Alaric is dead, said Luke. There was a wealth of controlled pain in his voice, though he had barely known Alaric. Clary knew the crushing weight of guilt would stay with him forever, and this is how you repay the unquestioning loyalty you bought so cheaply, Lucian, by letting them die for you. My father got away, said Jace, with the cup. His voice was dull. We delivered it right to him. I failed. Luke let one of his hands fall on Jace's head, brushing the glass from his hair. His claws were still out, his fingers stained with blood, but Jace suffered his touch as if he didn't mind it, and said nothing at all. It's not your fault, Luke said, looking down at Clary. His blue eyes were steady. They said, your brother needs you. Stay with him. She nodded, and Luke left them and went to the window. He threw it open, sending a draft of air through the room that guttered the candles. Clary could hear him shouting, calling down to the wolves below. She knelt down next to Jace. It's all right, she said haltingly, though clearly it wasn't, and might never be again, and she put her hand on his shoulder. The cloth of his shirt was rough under her fingertips, damp with sweat, strangely comforting. We have my mom back, we have you. We have everything that matters. He was right, that's why I couldn't make myself go through the portal, Jace whispered. I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill him. The only way you would have failed, she said, is if you had. He said nothing, only whispered something under his breath. She couldn't quite hear the words, but she reached out and took the bit of glass out of his hand. He was bleeding where he'd held it. From two fine and narrow gashes, she put the shard down and took his hand, closing his fingers over the injured palm. Honestly, Jay, she said as gently as she touched him, don't you know better than to play with broken glass? He made a sound like a choked laugh before he reached out and pulled her into his arms. She was aware of Luke watching them from the window, but she shut her eyes resolutely and buried her face against Jace's shoulder. He smelled of salt and blood, and only when his mouth came close to her ear did she understand what he was saying, what he had been whispering before. And it was the simplest litany of all. Her name. Just her name. And that is the end of that chapter. And basically almost the end of the entire book. Aside from the epilogue that I will record after after I record the episode 2 of Gravity Falls reaction. So, yeah. I'm getting a lot of recording done today. It's surprising. Anyway, yeah, so question, Here's the question time. What did you like about this chapter? And I'm gonna tell you what I liked. I, there's not much I didn't like in this, actually. I like all of it. I don't have a favorite part, though. I don't have a favorite part. It's got everything I love in a book. Even just in a chapter, maybe the fact that despite Valentine being Jace's father, Jace defied his father just to save Clary, the despair of losing Luke. And yeah, so I guess that might be my favorite part, general part. So what was your favorite part of this chapter? And second, this might be answered later, but I'm just gonna, I don't know. But I don't know what to say, really. I don't have another question for you guys. I'm still thinking. Let's see. Question about the chapter. I don't know, so I guess there won't be any question for this chapter, so other than the usual one. So bye. I guess goodbye, everyone. Have a nice day, night, morning, whatever, whenever you're viewing this. For me, it seems like it's gonna be the evening because it's now 4:33. So bye, and see you all in the next one.